All right, listener, you ready for a deep dive today?
Oh, always ready to dive in.
Okay, good, because things are a little tense where we're headed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're looking at the relationship between Israel and Turkey.
Mm,
And to put it lightly, it's complicated.
it really is.
Yeah, so we're going to use this article from the media line as like our guide
Okay.
and just try to unpack how these two countries went from allies
Right.
to, well, enemies is maybe too strong a word, but definitely not friends.
Yeah, from like security partners to almost adversaries.
Right, exactly. It is fascinating, though, like you said,
Oh, absolutely.
how quickly things can just change.
Oh, yeah, the geopolitical stage is always shifting.
And I think this is like a prime example.
Absolutely.
Like for years, that border between Israel and Syria was relatively peaceful.
Yeah, one of their quietest borders for sure.
And then boom, Syria collapses.
Right.
Turkey gets involved, and suddenly everything's different.
Totally different. Yeah, the whole power dynamic has been completely thrown off.
So, okay, let's rewind a bit. You mentioned that Israel and Turkey used to be allies.
They were.
What does that even look like?
So you have to imagine this, right?
Yeah,
It's like today, it's hard to even picture them at the same table.
exactly.
But back then, they cooperated on all sorts of things.
With what?
Security, intelligence sharing, even joint military exercises.
Wow.
And get this, Israelis used to vacation in Turkey.
No way.
It was a popular tourist destination.
That's wild.
Right, total 180 from where we are now.
Okay, so when did things start to go south? Was there like one specific event or was it more gradual?
Well, there were definitely some key events that sped things up,
Okay.
like the 2010 flotilla incident.
Oh, yeah, wasn't that where a Turkish group tried to break Israel's blockade of Gaza?
Exactly, and it led to that deadly clash and really kind of soured everything.
Yeah, that was a major international incident.
For sure.
Didn't relations like completely freeze over after that?
They did for a while, but honestly, it's been downhill ever since,
And especially with Erdogan.
especially with Erdogan.
The article really highlights his stance on Israel, and it's not exactly positive.
No, not at all. He's been a vocal critic since he came to power.
And it seems like it's only gotten more intense over time.
Oh, absolutely. More extreme even, you could say.
Okay, so let's talk about Erdogan then.
Okay.
The article really emphasizes his anti-Israel stance and how much he seems to agree with Hamas.
Right?
Is that a fair assessment? And what's driving that?
I think it's definitely fair to say he's been a major factor in how bad the relationship has gotten. I mean, his criticisms are pretty out there,
Like what specifically?
accusing Israel of war crimes, apartheid-like policies towards Palestinians, and then his open support for Hamas.
Which Israel considers a terrorist organization.
Exactly. So it's like constantly throwing fuel on the fire.
Okay, so there's clearly a big ideological difference here.
A huge one.
But is this all Erdogan just playing to his base, or is there more to it?
I think it's a mix of both, honestly.
Thanks.
Like, on one hand, he does have pressure from Islamist groups in Turkey.
To be even tougher on Israel.
Yeah, to take an even harder line.
But on the other hand, wouldn't alienating a country like Israel hurt Turkey too?
Exactly. It's this balancing act.
Right.
He needs to keep his base happy, but also maintain some international credibility.
That's a tough position to be in.
Oh, for sure. A real tightrope walk.
So where does Syria fit into all this?
Oh, Syria's huge.
You mentioned the conflict there has made things even more complicated.
Way more complicated. Basically, with Assad's regime collapsing, it created this power vacuum.
And Turkey's trying to fill it.
Exactly. They've been expanding their influence in Syria like crazy.
So basically, Turkey is becoming Israel's new neighbor.
Right.
And that can't be good.
It's creating a lot of tension.
Yeah, I mean, think
Yeah.
about it. For years, that border was quiet, and now they have a country with a leader who's not exactly friendly right there.
Right there on their doorstep.
And to make it even worse, Turkey's been supporting some Islamist groups in Syria
Oh, yeah.
that aren't exactly fans of Israel.
Definitely not, which is another huge concern for Israel.
So you've got two countries with this history of animosity,
A lot of history.
both trying to be the top dog in this volatile region.
Yeah, and both with very different visions for what that should look like.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It definitely has the potential to escalate, that's for sure.
And then on top of that, you've got the Kurdish factor.
Oh, yeah, the Kurds can't forget them.
I'll admit I'm a little fuzzy on the details there.
Okay, so the Kurds are this ethnic group that's spread across several countries.
Like Turkey, Syria, and Iraq.
Exactly. And they've been fighting for independence for ages.
And Israel is involved somehow.
Yeah, so within Syria, Israel has kind of quietly developed a relationship with certain Kurdish groups.
Why? What's the benefit for Israel?
Well, they see the Kurds as a potential ally against Iran.
Oh, right. Iran's a big player in Syria, too.
Huge player and a big concern for Israel.
So Israel's thinking, hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. But this whole thing drives Turkey absolutely crazy.
How come?
Because Turkey sees the Kurds as a massive threat.
Right, they've been dealing with Kurdish separatists inside Turkey for years.
Exactly, and they're not about to let an independent Kurdish state pop up in Syria.
So you've got this web of alliances and rivalries all playing out in a region that's already on edge.
It's a powder keg for sure.
And it's starting to feel like a geopolitical thriller novel.
It totally is.
And not one with a happy ending.
Well, the experts quoted in the article aren't too optimistic.
Really?
Especially with Erdogan in power. They don't see things getting better anytime soon.
So even though technically they still have diplomatic relations, it's basically meaningless.
Pretty much, yeah.
And Syria has become this proxy war.
Absolutely, with Israel and Turkey on opposite sides.
And that's a situation that could easily get out of control.
Very easily.
All right, listener, I think we've set the stage pretty well.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But things are definitely heating up.
Oh, yeah.
So in the next part of this deep dive, we're going to get into some of the thornier issues. Like, how likely is a direct conflict between Israel and Turkey?
What could trigger it? And what would the consequences be? Not just for the region, but for the whole world.
Sounds intense.
Oh, it is. So buckle up, listener. It's about to get real. Okay, listener, we're back and ready to, really get into the weeds here.
All right, let's do it.
So we've talked about the history, Erdogan, Syria, the Kurds. It's a lot.
It really is.
But I want to know what's pushing this towards an actual breaking point.
Okay.
What are the things we should be watching for? What could really set things off?
Well, one thing to remember is this isn't just like a personality clash.
Right.
It's not just Erdogan and whoever's leading Israel.
Yeah.
There are real issues driving this tension.
Okay, so let's get specific.
Okay.
What are some of those issues?
For Israel, a huge one is Turkey's support for Hamas.
Right. Hamas controls Gaza, which borders Israel.
Exactly, and they have a long history of conflict.
And Turkey's just giving them a free pass.
Well, not a free pass, but they do provide political support.
And potentially material support, too.
Right, which for Israel is a major red flag. Yeah, I can see why. It's like having someone arm your enemy right next door.
Exactly. It creates a very real security threat.
Are there any other groups in Syria that Israel's worried about?
Oh, yeah.
With ties to Turkey?
Yeah, a lot of them are Islamist groups that are pretty hostile to Israel.
And with Turkey potentially backing them, it's got to be a big concern.
It is. It basically means that borders no longer quiet at all.
So Turkey's backing groups that threaten Israel. Is Israel just sitting back and taking it?
Well, they're definitely not passive.
So what are they doing?
Israel's been conducting airstrikes in Syria.
What are they targeting?
Mostly what they say are Iranian and Hezbollah assets.
Hezbollah. Now, there's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, so Hezbollah is a Shia militia and political party in Lebanon.
Backed by Iran.
Right, and considered a terrorist organization by both Israel and the U.S.
And they've fought with Israel before.
Several times.
So Israel doesn't want them getting stronger in Syria.
Especially with Iran and maybe even Turkey supporting them.
This is starting to feel very interconnected.
It is.
Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Turkey, Israel, all tangled up in the Syrian conflict.
Yeah, and with all these players involved and the tensions so high, it's a real recipe for things to boil over.
And that's what makes experts think a direct military confrontation between Israel and Turkey is a real possibility now.
A very real and very scary possibility.
You said before that would be unprecedented.
Yeah, in modern times, I mean, they had some skirmishes right after Israel was founded, but nothing serious.
But now it's different.
The level of tension is so much higher, and they're both involved in Syria in such a direct way.
So listener, think about it. We've got a region that's already a mess.
Yeah, full of conflict.
You've got all these countries with their own interests that often clash.
And a long history of animosity between some of them.
Then throw in the unpredictability of a proxy war.
And the chance that something could accidentally escalate.
And suddenly this situation feels very, very precarious.
It is. And we can't forget that this isn't just some abstract geopolitical game. There are real people caught in the middle of all this.
The Syrian people have already suffered so much.
And any escalation would just make things worse.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about the human cost when we're talking about these big geopolitical moves.
But that's the reality.
Real people's lives are at stake.
And beyond the immediate human cost, there's the potential for this to destabilize the whole region.
And even have global consequences.
Absolutely. It could have ripple effects we can't even imagine.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Yeah.
What kind of ripple effects are we talking about?
Well, for starters, Turkey is a NATO member.
Right.
A conflict with Israel probably wouldn't trigger Article 5.
The collective defense clause.
Right. But it would still put huge pressure on other NATO members.
Yeah, they'd have to choose sides.
Exactly. And that would create a major rift in the alliance.
So the U.S. would have to decide between Turkey and Israel.
And that's a choice no one wants to make.
And what else? What other dominoes could fall?
What about the impact on global energy markets? Turkey controls some key shipping lanes in the Mediterranean.
And a conflict there could disrupt oil and gas shipments,
Sending prices through the roof and triggering an economic crisis.
So we're talking about a potential global energy crisis.
A split within NATO.
And a humanitarian disaster in Syria.
It's a pretty grim picture.
It is. It's like a worst-case scenario checklist.
And those are just the immediate consequences.
The long-term ones are even harder to predict.
Way harder. This could have repercussions for years to come.
Okay, listener, I know this is heavy stuff.
It is.
We've painted a pretty dark picture here.
We have. But it's important to understand the potential consequences.
Absolutely. But in the last part of this deep dive, we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about what, if anything, can be done to avoid this disaster.
Sounds like a good plan because right now, things aren't looking too good.
All right, listeners. So we've spent the last two parts of this deep dive really digging into this tension between Israel and Turkey.
Yeah, it's a messy situation for sure.
It is. And honestly, it's a bit disheartening.
Definitely not the most optimistic outlook.
No, not at all. But I have to ask, is there any hope here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. Can diplomacy actually play a role in all of this?
The article seems to suggest that while, diplomatic channels might technically be open, in reality, the relationship is on thin ice.
So fragile.
Super fragile. And as long as Erdogan is in charge in Turkey, it's hard to see any real improvement.
So we're stuck.
Pretty much, yeah. It feels like a stalemate.
With both sides just refusing to budge.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see why, from Erdogan's perspective, he's built so much of his political image on being against Israel.
Right. He's the champion of the Palestinian cause.
Exactly. And with the pressure he's facing at home.
From those Islamist groups we talked about.
Exactly. It's hard to imagine him suddenly changing his tune.
Okay, but let's say hypothetically.
Yeah.
Erdogan's out of the picture.
All right.
Someone new, a more moderate leader, takes over in Turkey. Would that change things?
It's possible, but even then it wouldn't be a quick fix.
Really?
Yeah, the article makes it clear that years of anti-Israel rhetoric.
Propaganda, even?
Right. It's really shifted public opinion in Turkey.
So even if the leader changes, the people might not.
Exactly. There's a deep mistrust of Israel now.
That wouldn't just vanish overnight.
Exactly. It goes beyond just the political level.
So a lack of trust on both sides.
Definitely. And I mean, it's not just Erdogan on the other side either.
You're right. There are plenty of people in Israel,
especially in Netanyahu's government,
who see Turkey as a threat.
And they're pushing for a tougher stance.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Totally. One side's actions just reinforce the other's fears.
And it just keeps escalating.
A self-fulfilling prophecy of animosity, you could say.
Okay, so how do we break out of this? Can anyone do anything?
Well, the international community could try to step in. Maybe pressure both sides to tone down the rhetoric, encourage some confidence-building measures.
Right.
Maybe even try to get some back-channel negotiations going.
That sounds good in theory, but realistically, is it going to work?
It's a long shot for sure.
Why?
Because at the end of the day, neither side seems to believe that cooperation is better than conflict.
They both see the other as the enemy.
And they're both prepared to use force to protect their interests.
That's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is. Yeah, it's not a very hopeful situation.
So what does this all mean for us, listener? What's the takeaway from all of this?
I think the big takeaway is that the world is a complicated place.
That's for sure.
Old alliances can break down. New conflicts can emerge.
And things can change really quickly.
Exactly. So we need to stay informed, stay engaged.
And be ready for anything.
Because as we've seen with Israel and Turkey, what seems stable one day can be on the brink of collapse the next.
Absolutely well said. And that's a good note to end on, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It is. So, listen, all thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex and often unsettling world of geopolitics.
It's been a journey.
It has, and we'll be back soon to explore another corner of the world and unpack what it means for all of us.
Looking forward to it.